Hey guys, it's Timothy here. With all of our Amonkhet pre-releases behind us, it's time to start drafting the new format. The set is intricate and complex and offers a challenge to even the most skilled drafters. Here are 10 tips and tricks to bring to your first Amonkhet draft. Number 1. Play 17 lands. Kaladesh and Aether Revolt spoiled us with 16 and sometimes even 15 land mana bases. Amonkhet is a much slower format with more expensive cards, slower gameplay, and ways to use extra mana. Aftermath, Im Balm, and Cyclone all encourage you to have extra mana available, and for this reason I recommend a standard 17 land mana base, although you could drop down to 16 and most of your top end cards have Cyclone. Expensive cards like Greater Sandworm and Lay Claim can be included without damaging your land count because of their ability to be cycled. Number 2. Prepare for Im Balm. Creatures with Im Balm are essentially 2-for-1s in every card, meaning you can outpace any mid-range deck with late-game inevitability. Im Balm even gives you extra value for discarding or incidental milling. While I would still recommend avoiding weak cards like Sacred Cat, the mechanic offers powerful payoffs in the form of Temet and Aven Wind Guide. Pack exile effects like Scarab Feast, Magma Spray, and Final Reward to deny your opponent the extra value. Number 3. Draft the powerful enchantments in the set. Amonkhet offers many powerful enchantments, some of which can end the game on their own. Cards like Sandworm Convergence, Cruel Reality, and Nest of Scarabs may look narrow and overcosted, but offer game-winning effects. The combination of ramp and the ability to play along control and game give you time to drop these absurd effects and win the game. On top of this, Amonkhet provides synergy in the form of the trials and cartouches, which range from decent on their own to super powerful when combined together. Furthermore, Amonkhet has few ways to deal with enchantments, so cards like Forsake the Worldly become desirable main deck cards. Number 4. Draft split cards as monocolored cards. Some Aftermath cards offer 2 reasonable or strong effects without stretching your mana base. Cards like Mouth to Feed and Insult to Injury are auto-includes in any deck running the color. Other Aftermath spells like Cut to Ribbons and Start to Finish offer great effects at the cost of being split between 2 colors. When drafting, take a split card if the first half fits your deck, and consider it a bonus if you end up both colors. Splashing is always an option, but don't feel obligated to run 2 colors if you're only interested in the first half. For example, it's fine to pick Heaven for your green deck with no intentions of being red for Earth itself. Value the 1-drops higher in green-black. Green-black can potentially have huge creatures, but many of them require you to offload -1/-1 counters on your own creatures, often the creatures themselves. With a turn 1 creature, green-black can curve into ridiculous early-game threats, such as Exemplar of Strength, Defiant Great Maul, and Plague Belcher. This means while drafting, you may want to prioritize 1-drops higher than you normally would, especially ones that give you extra value, such as Oashra Cultivator, Dread Wanderer, and the dreaded Sacred Cats. Number 6. Speaking from personal experience here, the red decks in the format can be really punishing. On top of having removal spells for 2, 3, 4, and even 7 toughness creatures, red decks have ways to push through tons of damage with effects of cards like On-Crop Crasher and Cartouche of Zeal. Other cards like Onward and Insult to Injury can deal huge amounts of damage out of nowhere. Not to mention red is capable of dropping above curve attackers and spells that punish your opponent for being behind. There may be a case for choosing to play second in Amonkhet Limited, but I would forego that decision until you know you're not against an aggro deck. Draft early blockers like Dune Beetle and Ancient Crab if you see red being a problem for you. Number 7. The Amonkhet Flyers are bombs. As is the case with most sets, Amonkhet's Flyers pose a huge threat to those unprepared. Aside from your normal run-of-the-mill Flyers, Amonkhet offers some of its biggest bombs in giant Flyers like Glorybringer, Archfiend of Ifnir, Curator of Mysteries, Angel of Sanctions, Glyph Keeper, and to a lesser extent, Seraph of the Suns, just to name a few. Not every deck can be packed with solid removal, so if you feel like Flyers are your weak point, try drafting cards like Minotaur Sure Shot and Giant Spider backed up by combat tricks and pump spells. A well-timed Spidery Grasp, or a main deck Stinging Shot or Illusory Wrappings can give you big game against your opponent's hyper-efficient flyers. Number 8. Cycling makes counterspells play better. I usually warn against most counterspells in Limited, except in special circumstances, and while cards like Cancel are never unplayable, they usually don't play exceptionally well. Cycling gives counterspells an extra edge for a control deck. Being able to hold up mana for Essence Extraction or a 2-mana Cycler on turn 2 gives you flexibility and an alternative to casting your counterspell if your opponent doesn't play into it. Having options is the hallmark to any control deck, which leads me to believe Cancel, Essence Scatter, Censor, and Reduce to Rubble may be important in any deck with a large number of Cyclers, specifically blue-black and blue-red decks. Number 9. Exerting your creatures is a real cost. Be careful when you do it. The Exert mechanic lets you pump your creatures for an added bonus in combat in exchange for keeping it tapped down the following turn. This seems great, but poses real risk if you don't consider the board state. Let's say I have a Gust Walker, staring down my opponent's Neff Crop Entangler. I attack for 3 by Exerting, causing Gust Walker to stay tapped down. My opponent hits me back for 2 the following turn without Exerting, then another 2 the turn after that, while Gust Walker is still tapped. Now I've taken 4 damage and I'm losing the race. This is not to say you shouldn't use Exert, it's quite strong, but it is a context-sensitive ability. As a general rule, you should feel free to Exert when 1. You have Vigilance or Untap effects to back up your creatures. 2. When Exerting pushes through a blocker you otherwise couldn't get through. 3. When Exerting won't cause you to fall behind in a race. And obviously 4. If it wins you the game. Finally, number 10. When a new set comes out, people like to argue about which cards are bad and which cards are great. Being the strongly opinionated player that I am, I've compiled a list of unplayable cards, ones that you should never include in your limited deck, let alone draft. Dispossess, the first card, is a discard spell intended for standard with no real meaningful applications in draft. In the same vein, Byforce destroys X artifacts, but artifacts are not at a premium in this set. The only truly good artifacts are Edifice of Authority, Oketra's Monument, and Ronus' Monument, and I'm not sure I would even board this in against any of those. Protection of the Heckma is a card that poses a minor annoyance, but doesn't actually affect creature combat. It just causes you to die slower. Do not run it. Next up is Trespasser's Curse. People tend to love slow drain cards like this, but they make terrible top decks. They don't advance your board state, and they don't justify a full card. You might find you're not winning as many games you play this in as you'd like. Gate to the Afterlife is an artifact that has a very low payoff and costs more than necessary. We don't know what God Pharaoh's Gift is, but right now this card is unplayable. As for Embalmer's Tools, I'm not convinced there's much merit to self-mill, even with Embalm, nor do I see decks amassing enough zombies to use this as a win condition. In the case of Luxa River Shrine, pure life gain, even at 2 per turn, is a roadblock more than a useful effect, especially given that you have to invest 6 mana before this becomes even that. Like Protection of the Heckma, this is not a proactive card and does little but stall the game. Harvest Season asks that you do too much for too little payoff. With 1 creature tapped, this is disappointing, and by the time you reach the point where you have multiple tapped creatures, you're probably fine on mana. Play Spring to Mind or Gift of Paradise if you want this sort of effect consistently. Finally, Cascade and Cataracts and Sunscorched Desert do so little that they're not worth messing up your mana base for. And with that, I want to thank you for watching, and I hope this ends up being helpful in your first drafts of the new format. As always, remember to like, comment, and subscribe. My name's Timothy, and I'll see y'all next time.